In July of 2022, a 6-year-old girl in suburban Colorado was sent home to die. Doctors gave her days, maybe a week. Her body was shutting down. The cancer had taken over. Her parents had already said their goodbyes. But 7 nights later, a dog did something that even the best trained medics couldn't. He saved her life. Not metaphorically. Literally. A golden retriever named Max, who had only been in the house for a week, sensed something in the dark. What he did next shocked an entire neighborhood, and changed everything. This isn't a fairy tale. It's a real story, documented, raw, and unforgettable. If you think you've seen it all, you haven't. Hit like, subscribe, and let's go. Lila Morgan was 6 years old and loved everything soft, plush animals, warm pancakes, and her faded pink blanket that never left her side. She lived with her parents in a quiet neighborhood just outside Boulder, Colorado. Their house was small but filled with light, and the rhythm of life was gentle: cartoons in the morning, garden walks with mom, naps by the window. She had just learned to write her name in crayon. Every Sunday, she fed the neighbors' chickens and giggled when they pecked at her shoes. But lately, things were different. She wasn't laughing as much. Her legs would sometimes shake. Her drawings got messy. Her mother said she was just tired. But her father, he had started sleeping with the light on. As if he already knew, something was coming. It started with a stumble. Just a small one, in the hallway, between the kitchen and the living room. Lila dropped her juice, blinked, and sat down on the floor without saying a word. Her mother rushed over, heart racing, but the girl just smiled. "I'm okay," she whispered. But over the next few days, there were more signs. A tilted smile. A slower blink. Her words sometimes slurred, as if she were underwater. Doctors ran tests. More tests. Then scans. And suddenly, the house that once echoed with laughter turned silent. Her crayon stayed in the drawer. The Sunday chicken visit stopped. Her parents didn't say it out loud, but Lila felt it: something was wrong. Deeply wrong. And still, no one knew how much worse it would get. Not yet. By the second week, Lila's smile had become a ghost of itself. She would sit in the same spot for hours, staring at nothing. Her left hand curled tightly, refusing to let go of her blanket, even in sleep. One evening, during dinner, she suddenly dropped her fork, not just dropped, but didn't notice. Her mother picked it up. Lila just kept chewing, slowly, eyes glassy. At night, she began humming to herself. The same tune. Over and over. It wasn't a song they recognized. Her father recorded it on his phone, just in case. They visited another doctor. Then another. Each appointment ended with softer voices, more serious faces. Something was pressing inward, invisible, unrelenting. Still, the official words hadn't come. But Lila's body, it already knew. And it was changing. The MRI was supposed to be routine, just to rule things out. But when the doctor walked into the room, he didn't bring comfort. He brought silence. Heavy, cold silence. Diffuse intrinsic pontine glioma, he finally said. DIPG. A rare, aggressive brain tumor in the brainstem. Inoperable. No cure. Lila's parents sat frozen. Words no longer made sense. Days, maybe weeks, that's all they were given. The world collapsed in a hospital hallway. No second chances. No miracle pills. Just, time, running out. Back home, Lila didn't understand the words, but she felt the change. She asked why everyone cried when they thought she was asleep. That night, a package arrived. A yellow vest, a leash, and a name tag. Max, a service dog, donated by a foundation. The timing felt random. But it wasn't. It was everything. They tried to smile for her. They tried to make pancakes, play cartoons, pretend it was just another quiet Tuesday. But the house had changed. Every shadow felt longer. Every laugh ended too soon. Lila's condition was slipping faster than expected. She now needed help walking, and her voice came out as a whisper. Her father spent hours reading medical journals, searching for anything, trials, vitamins, miracles. But all he found were numbers. And the numbers were cruel. Then there was Max, quiet. Gentle. Always watching her, never leaving the room. On the third night, he did something strange. As Lila's breathing grew shallow in her sleep, Max stood, ears alert, and stared at the door. Not barking, just waiting. Her parents didn't notice. Not yet. But Max, he knew. Something was coming. Something none of them were ready for. It happened just after midnight. The house was silent, save for the hum of the oxygen machine beside Lila's bed. Her parents were finally asleep, not peacefully, but from pure exhaustion. Then Max sat up. Rigid. His nose twitched, his breathing changed. Lila's chest rose, then stalled. Once. Twice. Then, nothing. Her lips turned pale. No alarm sounded. No one saw. But Max did. Without hesitation, he leapt off the bed, raced down the hall, claws scraping the hardwood. He barked, loud, desperate, sharp. No one woke. So he kept going. Out the dog door, across the yard, over the fence. Straight to the neighbors. He barked until lights came on, until a door opened, until someone followed. Minutes later, sirens. Medics. And a 6-year-old girl, seconds from death, was pulled back from the edge, because one dog refused to stay silent. The hospital room was chaos. Machines screamed. Voices shouted in codes and numbers her parents didn't understand. Her tiny body was pale, lifeless. For 6 full minutes, she had no pulse. Nurses rushed past them. A defibrillator. Then another. And then, a sound. Weak, but steady. Her heartbeat returned. Barely. The bleeding had been internal, fast, silent, fatal. If Max hadn't acted when he did, Lila would have been gone before dawn. Doctors stabilized her, but the damage, they didn't know yet. Her mother collapsed into a chair. Her father stood frozen, staring at the floor. "It's a miracle," someone whispered. But he didn't feel relief. Not yet. Until a soft paw touched his leg. Max, calm, steady, waiting. That night, for the first time in weeks, Lila opened her eyes. Just for a moment. And smiled. Against all odds, Lila survived the night. And the next. Her body was weak, but something had shifted. Doctors, once so certain of the end, now spoke in possibilities. An experimental treatment, a clinical trial in Denver, had just opened a single slot. Her case, now public thanks to the rescue, caught the attention of the foundation that placed Max. They stepped in, funded the process, and within days, she was flown by medical transport to begin a new fight. The tumor was still there. The odds were still brutal. But for the first time, Lila had a weapon, time. Max never left her side, even during chemotherapy. He lay beside her chair, head resting on her lap. She no longer walked, but she smiled again. Drew again. Laughed again. The girl who was supposed to be gone, was still here. 1 year later, Lila rolls through the school hallway in a bright purple wheelchair, waving to classmates with that same crooked smile. Her hair is thinner, her voice softer, but her eyes are alive. Max walks beside her, wearing his yellow vest, tail swaying like he owns the world. The doctors still don't say, cured, but they now say, possible. Her father often watches her from the doorway, still stunned. We already said goodbye to her, he once told a reporter, voice cracking. But Max didn't let us give up. This wasn't just a rescue. It was a reminder, sometimes, the difference between goodbye and another day is 4 paws and a heartbeat. And now I have to ask you, if a dog could do this, what would you have done? What will you do, when it matters most? Hit like, share this story, and tell us in the comments, would you have heard Max barking?
When I opened the cabin door that frozen morning, an 8-year-old boy stood there, and at his feet sat a wild wolf, not snarling, not hunting, guarding him. What happened next shook me so deeply, I still don't know if it was a miracle or a lesson from something far wiser than us. When I heard a lone wolf howling somewhere beyond the black wall of spruce, my heart simply stopped, because I knew, with a certainty I still cannot explain, that he was calling to someone, and it was not another wolf. I had come here to lose myself. 50 winters behind me, 2 failed marriages, 1 heart attack that left a zipper of scar tissue down my chest, all the numbers that say a man should stay home and rest. Instead, I booked a freight train, then a battered truck, then a rattling boat upriver, until the world of roads and cell towers fell away, and only the taiga remained. Somewhere over this endless sea of conifers was the Arctic Circle, beneath every boot print, permafrost older than nations. I told myself I needed silence, the honest kind that presses in on your eardrums and makes you hear your own blood moving. The cabin I'd borrowed was an old ranger's post, 1 room, wood-burning stove, a cot that creaked like an arthritic knee. That evening the sky dimmed all at once, as if some giant pinched out the sun between finger and thumb. No breeze, no bird song, only that delicate hissing of snow beginning to form, but not yet falling. I stood on the frost-slick porch, mug of weak tea steaming in my fist, and felt wonderfully small. Then something moved. At first it was only the sensation of motion, a ripple at the far edge of vision, where trunks blurred into twilight. I blinked, thinking it a trick of fatigue. The ripple became shape, the shape became muscle, and the muscle stepped free of the trees into the crease of moonlight that passed for a clearing. Gray shoulders rolled beneath a coat so thick it seemed armored. Long legs planted one deliberate print after another, as if the earth might crack under anything less cautious. A wolf, yes, but not the half-starved slinkers I'd glimpsed years ago in Yellowstone, darting like ghosts near dumpsters. This one radiated composure, gravity, an authority bigger than his own body. He halted dead center of the clearing and looked straight at me. I had hunted elk, guided tourists, patched bullet holes in poachers' trucks, yet that gaze stripped every credential from my hide. His eyes were the color of wet cedar and seemed to hold 2 separate fires, one savage, one impossibly gentle. I knew I should step back inside, close the door, reach for the flare gun at least. Instead, I found myself rooted, the way a child stares at lightning, half terror, half worship. My breath clouded, drifted, vanished. The porch boards groaned with the pounding in my chest. Seconds, or a century, passed. The wolf's ears twitched, as though catching a distant note in a melody I was too human to hear. He turned his head, not away from me, but past me, toward the dark river bending north beyond the ridge. Then, without hurry, he trotted into the trees and let night swallow him. No rustle, no snapped twig, nothing but silence knitting itself closed like skin over a wound. I exhaled so hard my knees sagged. Adrenaline left a metallic taste on my tongue. For a long minute I stood there, hoping, oddly, that he would return, needing proof the moment was real. But the clearing stayed empty. Eventually the cold found its way through my jacket, and practicality reclaimed its throne. Just an animal, I told myself while latching the door. A curious loner, maybe drawn by the smell of dinner. Still, as I spooned congealed beans out of a tin, my ears strained for any sound beyond the pop of the stove. I told myself stories, perhaps a sick wolf thrown from his pack. Perhaps age had dulled his caution. Perhaps I had simply imagined the intelligence in that gaze. Ordinarily, those rationalizations lull me to sleep the way tide pulls a dinghy from shore. Tonight they rattled like empty cans tied to a bumper. I lay on the cot fully clothed, boots unlaced but still on, headlamp beside the pillow. Moonlight bled through the single window in a rectangular bruise. Each time wind nudged the eaves, I jolted upright, convinced paw steps padded across the snow. More than once I eased to the door and pressed an ear to the seam. Nothing, nothing, always nothing. Yet the feeling remained, that somewhere in the timber a consciousness circled, weighing me against some private ledger. Sometime past midnight the stove settled with a sigh, and in that lull I caught it again. One deep, resonant howl rolling over the canopy, not menacing, not mournful, but purposeful. It rose, held, and spiraled down into quiet. A summons. My skin pebbled as though I were the one being called. Dawn finally seeped under the doorframe. I brewed chicory coffee, hands shaking so badly I spilled most of the grounds. Outside, the clearing lay pristine, unmarked by claw or hoof, as if the night had pressed a perfect reset. Blue smoke from the chimney climbed into a sky scrubbed clean by pre-dawn frost. I almost convinced myself the previous evening had been a waking dream, until I stepped off the porch and saw the snow beyond the packed dirt. There, in a neat arc around the cabin, ran a single track of prints, large, oval, front toes splayed just a little wider than the hind. I bent and touched one. The ice crystals were fresh, edges sharp, made not an hour earlier. They circled the cabin twice, then veered toward the river, exactly the direction the wolf had studied before vanishing. That was when comprehension struck like a hammer on bone. He hadn't been lost. He hadn't been curious. He had been searching. And last night he had come back to stand guard over something I could not yet see. I straightened, heart thundering anew, the early light suddenly too bright for comfort. In that instant, every logical explanation crumbled, and a single impossible question took its place. What was the wolf trying to tell me? I decided he was just a beast acting on instinct. I told myself the prints proved nothing, that the howl was mere coincidence. And yet, as the sun climbed and the forest woke around me, a sharper certainty lodged in my gut. The real story had only begun. I thought the night visit was the end of it, but by the next morning, I understood. The wolf had been speaking, and I had failed to listen. A faint rustling, no louder than a moth's wing, lifted me out of a dreamless doze. Gray dawn seeped through the curtains like smoke. I lay still, listening. There it was again. Scrape, pause, scrape, right outside the door, deliberate as knuckles on wood. For a heartbeat, I feared the wolf had returned alone, testing the latch. Then came a single, hesitant knock. I reached the door in 2 strides, heart banging so hard it drowned my breath. I swung it open, and the world tilted. A boy, maybe 8 years old, barefoot on snow-dusted boards, cheeks raw with cold, stared up at me. His hair stuck out in icy tufts. Behind him, filling the doorway's bottom half, sat the wolf. The beast's chest rose and fell in a silent rhythm, yellow eyes fixed on mine, unblinking. For 3 long seconds none of us moved. Vapor drifted from the boy's lips. The wolf's breath curled from his nostrils, ribboning the air between us. My hand clenched the door frame so tight the wood creaked. I managed to whisper, "Are you hurt?" The boy shook his head. He helped me. His voice was thin, hoarse, as if he'd spoken to no one for a century. Something inside me lurched, another rule of nature shrugging off its chains. I glanced at the wolf. He didn't twitch, didn't lower his gaze, didn't bare a tooth. He simply waited. I swallowed. "Come in, son. It's warm inside." The boy's gaze flicked to the wolf, seeking permission, and only then did he step over the threshold. Snow melted instantly beneath his feet, leaving wet footprints on the pine boards. I opened my mouth to wave the wolf away, instinct, habit, self-preservation, but the words died, because the wolf stayed exactly where he was, half inside, half outside, body blocking the gap like a sentry carved from living stone. He watched me pull a blanket from the cot and wrap it around the child's shoulders. Only after the boy shivered once, twice, did I realize the animal's ears had flattened, not in threat, but in careful concentration, as though cataloging each movement for signs of danger, to the boy, not to himself. "What's your name?" I asked, kneeling. My knees popped like rifle cracks. "Toby," he whispered. "How did you get here, Toby?" He hugged the blanket tight. "Got lost. Daddy couldn't find me." His lip quivered, but he didn't cry. It got dark. I was so cold. Then he came. A tiny thumb jerked toward the doorway. He lay next to me and I felt warm. When the sun showed a little, he pushed me with his nose, like telling me to walk, and he brought me here. I stared at the child, then at the wolf. A gust stirred the firs outside. Snow tumbled off a limb in a silent cascade. The wolf's ears flicked, but he didn't rise. "You're not afraid of him?" I murmured, forcing calm. Toby met my eyes, steady as a judge. Number he kept me alive. Those words carved a hollow beneath my ribs. Every wilderness manual I'd ever memorized, every training lecture on predator behavior, ashes now. This was something older, deeper, immune to textbooks. I shuffled back to the stove, tossed on logs, sparks leaping like fireflies. Heat blossomed. The boy's shoulders relaxed. The wolf still hadn't crossed the sill. It hit me that he would not enter uninvited, as though some boundary mattered to him as much as it did to us. I figured the danger ended once the child was inside, I thought, fool that I was. Surely the wolf will fade into the trees now, mission complete. But the forest had written a harsher script, and I was only learning my first lines. I filled a mug with lukewarm broth, handed it to Toby. He sipped, lids drooping in relief. I poured another, stepped to the doorway, and, hands shaking, set the cup on the plank before the wolf. An absurd gesture, but the only language I had. He sniffed the steam, then looked up, and in his eyes, I read something that buckled my knees. Recognition. He knew this ritual meant peace. He didn't drink. He returned his gaze to Toby, as if confirming the boy's safety. Only then did he stand, slow, deliberate, and back away into the dawn. Snow muffled every step. At the tree line he paused, turned his head over one shoulder, and our eyes locked again. In that gaze was a sentence I couldn't translate, only feel. "I will return, if needed." Then he slipped between the trunks and was gone. Silence rained down, heavy as snowmelt. I shut the door with a hand I barely controlled and leaned my forehead against the cold wood. Who was this child, wandering the taiga alone? How far had he traveled? And what covenant bound him to a creature men still label monster? "Behind me," Toby whispered, as if sensing my confusion. "He said I'd be safe with you." My spine prickled. How could he tell you that? The boy's eyelids drooped. Exhaustion folded him in two. Before sleep claimed him, he breathed a final fragment of impossibility. He didn't speak. I just knew. I watched him curl on the cot, blanket rising and falling in tiny breaths, and the cabin seemed suddenly too small for the mystery it contained. The questions pressed against the walls like roots lifting a foundation. Outside, the pale sky brightened, innocent, indifferent. But somewhere beyond the frost-blurred window, a guardian moved through shadows, bound by motives I could neither fathom nor deny. And until I understood why that wolf had chosen this boy and this cabin, no door felt thick enough to keep the unknown at bay. Toby slept for nearly an hour, then woke coughing, dry, rasping, the sound of a throat scraped by cold air and panic. I poured warm water, eased him against the pillow, and waited. He stared into the stove's glow, as though trying to decide whether what had happened to him belonged to day or night. "Tell me, son," I said, keeping my voice low. "How did you end up out there alone?" He rubbed one wrist across his eyes and began. He and his father had driven north at dawn, following a 2-track logging road until the ruts filled with puddles and the truck could go no farther. The air smelled of wet moss and chanterelles, golden treasure for city restaurants, his dad liked to say. They carried canvas sacks and a tin whistle the man would blow every half hour so the boy could find him if they drifted apart. "It was fun at first," Toby murmured. "The forest felt friendly." He pinched the blanket's edge like kneading clay. Then the clouds came too fast, like they were chasing us. His father, intent on a cluster of mushrooms farther uphill, waved Toby to keep picking. The boy stooped to pry a pale cap from the duff. When he straightened, the trees had rearranged themselves, hiding his father's orange vest. A wind rose, hard and sudden, shaking sleet out of the sky. The tin whistle sounded once, thin and distant, then the gale swallowed it. Toby called back. No answer. He ran the direction he thought he'd seen the vest, but the forest shifted with every dozen steps, blurring trunks into walls. Sleet hammered his ears, needles stung his cheeks. He tried following footprints, yet the ground turned to white slurry, prints drowning in seconds. "I yelled till my throat hurt," he said, voice barely above a breath. "I thought Daddy would hear, but the wind kept pushing the words away." He wandered in widening spirals, believing he'd find the logging ruts, until a root snagged his boot and flung him face first into moss. Mud chilled his shirt. He rolled onto his back and watched treetops whip against a sky the color of slate. Daylight bled out fast. Blue turned gunmetal, then tar. At that moment, a grown man might curse or pray. Toby did both in one ragged sob, then curled under a fallen cedar bough for shelter. Ice pellets pinged on wood. His fingers went numb, then his lips. He tried counting to stay awake, but lost the numbers somewhere after 30. I thought, "This is where people freeze. Right here," he whispered. So I lay as small as I could and waited. Minutes, maybe hours, passed. The storm's fury guttered, leaving a hush thick enough to hear snowflakes land. And in that hush came footfalls, soft, measured, too heavy for a rabbit, too silent for a human boot. Toby tensed, ready to scream or run, but his body was snow-heavy. A shape emerged from darkness, long muzzle, rime-frosted fur, eyes like reflected hearthlight. The wolf stopped a pace away and looked at him, not at his throat, not at the easy prey his small body offered, but straight into his eyes, as though acknowledging an equal. "I was so cold I couldn't even be scared," Toby said, voice cracking. "I just wanted someone to know I was there." The wolf padded closer, lowered himself onto his belly beside the boy, and pressed his flank against the thin jacket. Heat radiated through layers. Toby felt tremors leave his muscles, replaced by a stunned warmth. Snow continued to fall, covering them both in a quiet quilt. The beast's breath fogged and drifted, scented with the wild secrets. "He didn't do anything," the child said, amazement blooming across his face even now. He was just there, and I wasn't afraid anymore. That single sentence punched the air from my lungs. How many nights had I, a grown man, wished for that simple miracle, someone simply there? Toby's story rolled on. A squeal shattered the calm. A wild boar rooting blindly through drifts, driven by the same hunger that drives bullets. The wolf rose, body a low gray bowstring, and placed himself between predator and child. No growl, no snarl, just presence, large and immovable. The boar huffed, stomped, then wheeled away, as if meeting a wall it could not breach. The storm eased. Dawn painted frost on every needle. The wolf nudged Toby to his feet, circled until the boy faced east, then started walking, pausing every few yards to be sure the child followed. They moved like that for more than an hour, small footprints inside larger ones, life birthing life, until my cabin appeared between trunks, smoke curling faintly above. He stopped when we reached your porch, Toby finished, eyelids drooping. I knew he wanted me to knock, so I did. Silence pooled between us, thick as resin. My mind flipped through explanations, imprinting, chance, desperation, but each sounded flimsy against the image of that animal flattening itself against winter to warm a human child. So he saved you, I murmured. Toby nodded once, fighting sleep. He's not done, he added, already drifting. He still has something to show us. A chill rippled over my scalp. I tucked the blanket tighter and watched his lashes settle. Outside, wind worried the eaves, but beneath it, I imagined lighter footfalls, pacing patiently, waiting for whatever came next. I wanted to believe the ordeal had ended now that the boy was safe inside, but somewhere deep I sensed this was only an intermission, one calm breath before the forest spoke again in a voice older than fire. I figured the wolf had already worked his wonder, yet the day was young, and the wild was not finished rewriting its own rules. "Weren't you scared?" I asked, once Toby's color returned, the mug of broth steady in his small hands. He shook his head, expression soft but certain. "He growled," he said, voice thin as smoke, "but not at me. He was protecting me." The words cracked something in me. I crouched beside the cot, listening as the boy's eyes drifted beyond the log walls, back into night. The storm had finally burned itself out, leaving the forest in a hush so deep the snowflakes seemed to fall in slow motion. Toby lay curled beneath the cedar bough, pressed to the wolf's ribs, heartbeat sinking to heartbeat. An hour, maybe two, of fragile peace ticked past. Then the stillness shattered. Branches snapped somewhere uphill, a thrashing like a bulldozer made of muscle and gristle. Toby felt the wolf's entire body stiffen beneath his hands, heat turning to electric tension. A muskier scent, earth and rage, rolled down on the wind. Moonlight sifted through rags of cloud, and in that pale wash a shape lumbered into view. A boar, huge, scarred, its tusks thick as pick handles, eyes lit with the dull red of hunger turned mean. Winter drives pigs mad. They'll gore a bear if feeds run thin. The animal flung its head side to side, breath pumping in ragged puffs. The wolf stood in one fluid motion, positioning his body square between tusks and child. He didn't snarl outright. Instead, a deep growl rooted somewhere in his chest rumbled outward, low as a diesel engine idling on a frozen morning. Toby felt it more than heard it, the vibration settling into his bones like a living oath. "Nothing will touch you while I breathe." The boar slashed the crusted snow, showering sparks of ice. It lunged, half charge, half bluff. The wolf answered with a volcanic bark that rolled across the clearing like thunder detonating just overhead. Hackles rose, tail stiff as rebar. He advanced 2 deliberate steps, forcing the boar to reconsider the shape of courage. For 3 heartbeats, predator and predator measured each other. Toby said he could feel fear tear at the edges of his mind, yet somehow the heat radiating off the wolf anchored him, held him still. Then the wolf lifted his muzzle and howled, not the searching cry I'd heard the night before, but a flare of sound that cut through the cold, a blade honed with iron and warning. The boar faltered, nostrils quivering. One more snort, more question than threat, and the beast broke away, crashing into underbrush, leaving silence like a crater behind. Only when the last twig snapped did the wolf's stance soften. He circled Toby, nosing the boy's cheek, inspecting for harm. Satisfied, he lay beside him again, flank tight to the child's spine, and the dark knitted itself shut. "That's when I knew he'd keep me safe," Toby murmured, eyes sparkling with a strange mixture of wonder and fatigue. "He was my wall." I swallowed, tasting envy in the back of my throat. Envy for a trust I'd never earned from any creature, human or otherwise. "And in the morning?" Toby's face brightened. He stood up before the sun climbed, looked at me, then started trotting away. He'd go a bit, stop, glance over his shoulder until I got up and followed, like breadcrumbs made of footprints. They traveled single file along a narrow animal path, weaving between fir trunks iced in silver. Whenever the boy lagged, the wolf doubled back, bumping his head against Toby's leg to prod him forward. They crossed a frozen creek, footprints mapping perfect paired constellations in the frost. A hawk screeched overhead, the wolf's ears twitched, but he never left the boy's side. After nearly an hour, the trees thinned, and smoke from my chimney stitched the sky. The wolf halted at the tree line, head high, as though checking unseen traffic. He nudged Toby one final time toward the porch. That done, he eased into the fringe of shadows, still close enough for the child to feel, but giving him the dignity to make the last few steps alone. Toby raised the mug to his lips, blew on the surface, and offered a small, exhausted smile. "He knew you were there, waiting." I pressed a hand to the window pane, gaze flicking over the clearing where empty snow glared back. Part of me argued we'd navigated the worst. That boy and beast had intersected by cosmic accident, and the lines had now separated. But memory of that previous night's eyes, cedar fire glint and patient judgment, whispered a different geometry. Even now I could picture the wolf pacing just beyond sight, arc of duty unbroken. The boy's tale had stitched new rules into my blood, that loyalty could leap species, and guardianship could wear a wolf's skin. I caught my reflection in the glass, grizzled man, trembling shoulders, and realized fear was no longer the dominant drum in my chest. It was expectation, a readiness for whatever next page the wilderness might flip open. I told myself the wolf had merely happened upon the child, and lingered out of curiosity, nothing more. But as Toby's story settled into the corners of the room like falling ash, I understood. The animal had guided him here on purpose, straight into my waiting hands, and that meant the real reason for this encounter was still prowling the edge of morning, unseen, unfinished. We left the cabin as the sun cleared the spruce tops, icy needles flashing like shards of broken glass. I gave Toby my spare parka. The sleeves swallowed his wrists, but he beamed the way kids do when wearing something that smells of wood smoke and safety. A mile south ran a logging road, and 6 miles beyond that, a paved highway, our lifeline to a ranger station with radios and rescue crews. Toby slipped his mittened hand into mine. The forest inhaled, exhaled, settling into its slow daylight rhythm. Chickadees burst like shaken pepper over the branches. Somewhere far off, an axbeak raven croaked, a note of warning or welcome, I couldn't tell. We walked single file along the frozen creek. On our left, 50 yards beyond a picket of young birch, a gray shadow kept pace, the wolf, nose low, ears swiveling. He never crossed the invisible line between wilderness and our narrow trail, yet his presence rode my spine like a warm blade. Every time Toby stumbled over a root, the wolf paused, eyes bright with a shepherd's patience. "You think he'll stay with us all the way?" I whispered. The boy considered, as though consulting internal weather. Until Daddy's safe, yes. An hour in, the creek bent west, and the trees thinned into a meadow shaved by recent wind. Knee-deep drifts glazed the clearing, broken only by our path and a second parallel seam of paw prints, fresh, sharp-edged. The wolf trotted nearer the margin, close enough for me to hear the snow squeak under his pads. I half expected him to veer off, claim distance now that dawn and calm had returned. Instead, he slowed, lifted his nose, and bristled. I followed his line of sight and felt my chest cave. At the meadow's far edge knelt a man in a ripped orange vest, shoulders heaving as if each breath were a punishment. Snow clung to his beard, and his gloveless fingers combed the drifts in frantic, pointless patterns, the shape of shattered hope. "Daddy!" Toby shouted, voice cracking the hush like a dropped plate. He wrenched free of my grasp and ran. The man's head snapped up. Eyes wide with disbelief, he lurched to his feet, boots slipping. Father and son collided, collapsing into the snow, their sobs spilling into each other so fast they blurred. The scene punched something loose inside me, old regrets, unspoken apologies, until my own throat tightened. Off to one side, the wolf halted, muscles taut, tail level. He watched the reunion with the stillness of a statue, waiting for a sculptor's final strike. Steam curled from his nostrils. Each exhale looked like surrender. I walked closer, cautious not to crowd the moment. The father rocked Toby against his chest, murmuring broken sentences. "Thought I'd lost you. Never forgive myself. Miracle, my boy. My brave boy." Bedrock words, the kind you hammer into your soul when all other architecture collapses. At last, Toby drew back, tears hanging like quicksilver from his lashes. He pointed. "Daddy, he saved me." The man's gaze followed the finger and landed on the wolf. I watched 80 emotions collide behind his eyes: instinctive fear, disbelief, raw gratitude. His lips parted, but no sound emerged. The wolf absorbed the stare, unblinking. Something passed between them, flinty, fleeting, but real. Then he did something I will never forget. He bowed his head, just once, the way one warrior might salute another across a battlefield neither wished for. I took a step forward, voice ragged. "You helped us find him," I said, half statement, half prayer. "Thank you." The wolf's ears flicked toward me. Sunlight caught in his eyes, revealing layers I had no words for. Exhaustion, yes. Whatever guardian task drove him had taxed bone and spirit, but also unbroken dignity, and something deeper still, the calm of a creature who knows the weight of his choices and would carry them again. In that gaze was everything: weariness, grace, and the unmistakable spark of understanding that he had done a good thing. Toby's father whispered, "Dear God." He struggled to stand, one arm still around the child. Perhaps he meant to approach, perhaps to kneel in thanks. I'll never know. The wolf sensed the motion, gave one final lingering look, first to the boy, then to me, and turned. He moved back the way we'd come, loping along the tree line. No hurry, no furtive glances. Just a soldier dismissed after the last battle, heading home through fields still heavy with smoke. When distance blurred him to gray watercolors, I cupped my hands to my mouth. "Thank you." The words tore out, echoing against the drums of pine. Far across the white, he paused, turned his head. Our eyes met for the third and, I felt, final time. The wind caught my breath, my chest filled with something too big for words. Respect, awe, a sudden faith in the threads that tie separate hearts across species. Then he vanished into the timber, his shape folding into shadow the way a story folds into memory. Toby's father sagged, clutching his son as though afraid the universe might snatch him back. I helped them to the road, flagged down a ranger snowcat an hour later, relayed the impossible tale to men whose faces flickered between skepticism and wonder. Paperwork would follow, statements, maybe headlines. but the clearing was already filling with fresh snow, erasing tracks, smoothing the earth to silence. Somewhere beyond that hush padded a wolf whose name I would never know, but whose service was carved forever into 3 human hearts. And in the embers of his final look, I felt a promise ignite. I would carry his story forward, guard it like a flame against the darkness of disbelief. The Ranger Snowcat groaned along the icy ruts, heater roaring, metal treads clanking like distant church bells. Inside the cab we huddled on a bench meant for gear, not people. Toby sat between his father and me, bundled in a thermal blanket the Rangers had handed over, cheeks still blotched with windburn, but eyes bright, alive. His dad, Grant, he'd murmured when we exchanged names, kept one gloved hand locked around the boy's shoulder as if a single blink might tear the child away again. Grant's lips moved silently, inventorying every freckle, every eyelash, as though confirming the miracle by itemizing it. Then, suddenly, words burst out, raw and shaking. "He followed you? All night?" The question was aimed at Toby, but ricocheted around the cabin, lodging in each of us. "That animal, he stayed with you, protected you?" Toby nodded, almost shy, as if admitting to something wonderful he wasn't sure grown-ups were allowed to believe. "I'd be dead if he hadn't," he said, voice small but steady. "He's good, Daddy. Not bad. Just good." Grant's shoulders tremored. He tried to speak again, but what came was a rasp that collapsed into a sob. He turned his face to the plexiglass window, shoulders quaking. For a moment, only the engine filled the space. I'd seen men cry, drunk hunters, grieving widowers, soldiers at graves, but nothing prepared me for the rawness of that father sound in a steel box rumbling through subarctic twilight. It was like the forest itself had bent and snapped inside him. He wiped his face with the back of a mitten, tried to laugh it off, failed. We don't even protect our own that way," he whispered, voice husky, half accusation, half confession. "Not like he did, not like that." Toby slid closer, rested his head on the broad chest that shook under layers of fleece. "Daddy," he was tired, I could tell, but he kept standing between me and everything else, like a wall. Grant's breath hitched again. "A wall," he echoed, tasting the word, bruising it. He looked at me, eyes red-rimmed, searching for adult corroboration. "You saw him. You felt it, right?" "All of it," I said quietly. "He tracked us to the meadow, waited till you had your son in your arms, then walked away like a sentry off duty." My voice hummed with equal parts awe and something like envy. "He knew." Grant exhaled, long and ragged. "Why?" The syllable drifted, helpless. "I thought of territorial maps, predator-prey charts, ethology lectures, all the neat lines we draw around animal behavior so we can sleep at night, believing we understand the wild. Then I pictured those cedar-colored eyes meeting mine in the clearing, carrying something that refused to fit any lecture slide. "I don't know," I answered. "Maybe because he could, maybe because the forest wanted it done, and he's the only one who listened." Grant bowed his head, pressing his lips to Toby's hair. "We're told not to give animals our human feelings," he muttered. "But if that wasn't mercy, what the hell was it?" No one replied. The ranger at the wheel kept his gaze ahead, jaw clenched, pretending not to eavesdrop while every muscle in his face said he was turning the story over like a stone that might hatch. Snow pelted the windshield, wipers squealing. The heater coughed, then surged, warm air smelling of diesel and wool. For a stretch we rode in silence, the kind thick enough to sculpt. Finally Grant cleared his throat. "I'm going to tell them," he said, defiant as a newly forged vow. "Reporters, officials, whoever asks, I'll tell them a wolf saved my boy." Toby's hand found his father's, squeezed once. "He deserves people to know," the child said, eyes half-lidded. Grant looked at me again, softer now. "You'll back me up?" With everything I've got, I promised, and felt the truth solder inside my ribs. Even so, a small voice whispered caution. The world likes its boundaries solid. Predator, prey, hero, villain. A story that erases lines invites knives of ridicule. I pushed that fear aside. The wolf deserved better than our cowardice. The snowcat crested a rise, and ahead, a cluster of satellite dishes and sodium lamps bloomed. The ranger outpost. Relief washed over Grant's face, but behind it lingered an older emotion, almost grief, as though crossing back into human infrastructure meant leaving behind a cathedral we barely understood. Toby dozed against his father's chest, breaths even. Grant stroked the boy's hair, tears drying into salt. We spend our whole lives teaching kids the world is dangerous, he whispered, gazing through me. But out there, danger kept him warm. My chest twisted. Outside, the tree line slid away into gray, and for a heartbeat, I imagined a lone figure pacing just inside the shadows, ears forward, mission unfinished. I couldn't shake the feeling that our roles had reversed out there, that it was the wolf who'd been the teacher, and we the children clinging to simpler stories. The snowcat slowed, treads crunching to a stop. Doors clanged open, radios crackled. Men in orange parkas approached with stretchers and thermoses. Civilization's safety net unfurled. But as we stepped into the glare of floodlights, I caught Grant's whisper to his son, a fragile prayer wrapped in thankfulness. We'll never forget him, Toby. Never. Because now we know how love walks when it wears the shape of a wolf. And I realized the true rescue wasn't finished. It had only just begun, threading through a father's heart, a child's memory, and a witness who could no longer pretend the world was simple. The city swallowed me whole long before the train hissed to its final stop. Neon pooled in puddles, traffic howled, and somewhere above the smog, a winter moon tried to remind me of other kinds of silence, but its voice was throttled by sirens and exhaust. I should have felt relief pressing keys into the lock of my apartment, but every turn of metal sounded wrong, like hammering nails through birdsong. I showered twice, scalding hot, as if enough steam could strip the taiga from my skin. It didn't. Long after midnight, I sat at my kitchen table with a mug I didn't remember filling and opened my laptop. YouTube brightened the room in nervous blues. I typed, "Wolf protects, child." Results spilled across the screen. Cartoon clips, shaky cell phone miracles, documentaries with portentous voiceovers. I clicked one, then another, but each left me colder. They were too perfect or too staged, tidy arcs that ended where comfort prefers. None carried the smell of cedar smoke breath, the thunder-quiet weight of a real flank shielding a real heartbeat. Video after video, my chest tightened. I wanted an algorithm to hand me logic, a study, a pattern, a line graph plotting altruism against food scarcity. I wanted to prove what I'd seen was statistically plausible, so I could file it away and sleep. Explanation never came. The forest flickered on the screen in pixelated fragments, but the living truth remained out there, pacing just beyond reach. At 4 a.m., I shut the lid and stared at the faint wolf print smear my thumb had left on the aluminum. The city beyond the window never rested, yet my apartment felt tomb quiet. That same hush from the clearing had followed me here, an uninvited companion sitting on the couch, reminding me that every honk, every elevator ding, was a thin veneer over something older and far more articulate. By dawn, I gave up negotiating with sleep. I pulled a leather-bound notebook from a drawer, gift from a friend who said I needed hobbies, not prescriptions, and uncapped a pen. The words bled out fast, messy. I watched a wolf rescue a child, not for meat, not for favor, simply because he could. Ink pooled, dried into a jagged constellation. My hand kept moving. He stood between tusks and skin, cold and warmth, night and the next morning. He looked at me with eyes that carried knowledge deeper than the riverbed. I am back among concrete, but the howl is still inside my lungs, echoing every time I breathe. The pen stilled. I read the lines aloud, half ashamed of their tremor, half amazed they existed outside my skull. They felt truer than any map. A notification pinged on my phone, news push about market futures. I slid it aside. Then another buzzed, group chat debating football trades. I muted it. The world I'd returned to suddenly felt trivial, like paper walls around the engine of a star. My gaze drifted to the blank page beneath the fresh ink. I thought of Grant and Toby, of the silent vow we'd made beneath that meadow sky, to speak the truth, even if it sounded like myth. The wolf had delivered a life back to human arms. The least we could do was deliver his story whole. So I angled my phone camera toward the notebook, snapped a photo of those raw lines, and opened the video app I almost never used. Hands trembling, I hit record. The lens caught my apartment's cheap lamp, the shadows under my eyes, the grainy dawn pushing through blinds. I drew a breath that still tasted of spruce. "If your heart's pounding right now," I said, voice roughened by sleepless wonder, "you get it. Subscribe to this channel. Here we tell the truths about nature, the ones the textbooks forget, the ones that change you forever." The red icon winked off. I stared at the thumbnail. An ordinary man in an ordinary kitchen, except for the wildfire flickering behind his pupils. Then I hit post, letting the current carry it where it would. Maybe skeptics would swarm, maybe algorithms would bury it. Yet somewhere, someone with city noise ringing in their ears might feel the hush slip in between beats and realize the wild still keeps its own ledger of miracles. I closed the notebook. Outside, traffic thickened, commuters funneling toward screens and deadlines. I shouldered my coat anyway, stepped onto the balcony, and let winter air cut clean through the urban staleness. Cars hissed below, a jet roared overhead, but beneath it all I heard something else, steady and patient. Paw steps pacing the border of memory, ensuring I would not forget. The wolf had guarded a child through a storm. Now he guarded the silence inside me. And every time the city threatened to drown that silence, I would return here, pen ready, to write another line in the ledger he began, until words, like tracks in fresh snow, led someone else to a clearing where disbelief finally knelt before wonder. When the winter local rattled away from the whistle stop and darkness closed like theater curtains, I felt the forest slip its old key into my bones. 30 days had hardened city noises back into habits, but the silence here cracked them like thin ice. I hiked the same narrow track to the ranger cabin, headlights of my headlamp bobbing over snow crust. Every boot crunch said, "Welcome home." Every shadow said, "Remember." The stove was just as I'd left it, rusty door, iron lungs ready to breathe heat. Yet the cabin felt smaller, as if the miracle had swollen its walls and then followed me out, leaving an ache where awe once swirled. The first 2 nights nothing happened but ordinary winter sounds, owls gossiping, frost ticking logs, my own pulse drumming stories I'd already told a million strangers online. I should have slept, but my ears kept reaching past the roof for one note only a month old. I began to doubt, to wonder if memory had exaggerated tones, stretched silhouettes. Maybe what I'd witnessed was huge only inside my skull. On the third and final evening, the moon rose bruised purple behind the pines, and the hush thickened until even my breath sounded foreign. I stepped onto the porch, mug steaming, and that's when the world folded open. A single resonant howl rolled across the treetops. It started low, climbed, held, precisely the pitch that had frozen my life in place 40 nights ago. I didn't think. I grabbed my coat, left the door swinging on its hinges, and followed the sound into the dark. Snow reached my calves, erased the old trail, but the howl guided me like a lantern made of vibration. I pushed through birch branches that glittered with rime. The forest exhaled clouds of silence between each crunch of my boots, as if giving me space to decide whether courage or common sense mattered more. Another howl, closer, shorter, almost a question, pulled me forward into the same meadow where Toby had collided with Salvation. Moonlight washed the clearing silver, and there he was. He stood exactly where father and son had wept, legs straight, head high, fur limbed with cold fire. Not a ghost, not a dream, but muscle and breath making visible the very idea of guardianship. His eyes caught the moon and threw it back at me in 2 cedar-colored coins. He did not advance, he did not retreat, he simply watched. I tried to speak, but the air left my throat a strangled mist. Instead, I raised a hand, the same gesture we offered distant friends we're afraid to scare with closeness. The wolf's ears flicked. Snowflakes landed on his back and stayed, unwilling to melt off such measured heat. Seconds stretched until they felt like the length of winter itself. I took 1 step, then another. He didn't flinch, yet some invisible boundary hummed between us, a wire strung with unspoken rules. I stopped a dozen yards away, heart hammering instructions my tongue couldn't translate. He inhaled, a sound barely more than wind through reeds, and turned his head toward the north line of trees. There, half in shadow, half in moon glow, sat a single paw print, pristine, enormous, pressed into untouched drift. Deliberate evidence that what you see is real. He looked back at me once more, as if to say, "There will always be tracks if you choose to follow," then pivoted, glide-stepped into the dark, and vanished. I stood rooted, the lonely paw print between us like a punctuation mark the forest itself had stamped onto blank snow. Not a farewell, more an ellipsis, proof the story continues wherever wonder is willing to walk. My throat unlocked. "If you can hear me," I whispered into the black timber, "I remember you. I understand." A wind curled through the meadow, lifting powder into brief galaxies. When it settled, the clearing was again only snow and moonlight, but I was not the same man who'd entered it. The cabin behind me might still be empty wood, the city beyond might still grind its gears, but somewhere an intelligence wider than language had nodded, and that nod would echo in every choice I made from here on. I knelt beside the paw print, traced its rim with a gloved finger, and felt the pulse of the universe beat once beneath the crust. Had anyone else described such moment to me yesterday, I would have laughed, gently, certain they'd mistaken myth for memory. Now I carried proof etched deeper than bone. I brushed fresh snow over the track, not to erase it, but to seal it, the way you close a locket around something precious. If someone told me this tale, I'd never believe it. But I saw it, felt it, stood inside it, and now I know we are not alone in this world. There is someone, something, wiser than we dare imagine. If you, too, have witnessed a miracle in the wild, write, "Animals remember kindness."